Hey Tad,
Thanks
how
for
you
doing
doing?
this. Yeah, I'm hoping if we keep doing this, some more folks will start joining into the ones. I've been doing this with Chad Westport, and man, he's got a huge following. It's pretty amazing. I
Cool.
think there were like a couple hundred people on there. So
Very cool. Was he at the summit? Do I know him?
I don't know if you do. He's a tent grower. He does genetics. Writes for Sensi Seeds. Has a few different things that he does. Um,
Okay.
but he's actually local to me. He's out of Westport, Washington, and we actually went to high school together. Did
Oh,
not
nice.
did not even know that until way later. I was like, wait a minute, we played baseball on the same team. So
Oh, funny.
kind of fun. Yeah. Um, but let's dive into it. So we were both at the Living Soil Summit. You gave the keynote speech on the first day. It was awesome. What were
Thank
your
you.
thoughts about the Soil Summit?
Yeah, it's funny that I'm glad you said that because about my speech because when you're up there, you just have no idea what's going on. I loved it. I actually had a great time. I was only there for about a day and a half. Um, I had to be back for family reasons on Saturday, and I was bummed I wasn't there the whole time because I wasn't able to connect with everyone I wanted to. But to me, it was really special because for years, I mean, this goes back like over 10 years, I've known people who were there and I've never met them. I think everyone had that experience where, like, we're all so digital and we all work all over the place and nobody lives in the same spot. And I got there and it was like, I was meeting all these people who I knew, like I know you, we're like friends, and yet we've never been together in a physical location. Super cool to have everyone together.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting, in the living soil community, there's obviously many different like approaches and philosophies and kind of like camps.
Yeah.
And that was a really cool element to me because A, it was so obvious, but B, everyone was like getting along and it was just like kind of a fun, I wouldn't say camaraderie, but it was I can't really explain the general like vibe was just really good. Um, despite these like, these
Everyone was
differences in
high.
how we yeah, everyone was super high, super, super high. Elaine Ingham, were you there? Elaine Ingham got up there. Were you there for this?
I missed. I came in at the very end, the Q&A. I didn't realize she was speaking. I thought Keisha was, and we were in a meeting with the facility that happened to come out there for
Okay, cool.
breakfast.
Well,
So
anyway, she she's like coughing and she couldn't stop coughing and everyone's smoking weed and I'm like, you guys,
yeah.
you gotta stop smoking. Anyway, there were some funny moments, but there was a lot of cannabis combusted in that tent.
Oh yeah, yeah. You couldn't help it. And so for me, who I've talked about this before. Like I'm a lightweight. I do use cannabis, but not to the levels or extent that most of the people there are at. And so, like, I knew I was gonna have to drive the rental car with my people back to the hotel that evening, and so I was trying to, like, stay lucid and sober, and also just so I could have a good conversation, and I'm not just, like, staring off into the clouds, you know? Um, so I would hope that maybe in the future they would consider for people like Elaine or, like, people who are more sensitive like myself, not smoking in the tent, speaker tent, where the talks are going on. Also, there were kids there, and I know everyone has their different philosophies on how we raise children. I don't want to get into that, but like, I wouldn't have felt comfortable with my 4-year-old being in that room. Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
my 2 cents on that.
Well, I
But
I I hear you, and I think it was interesting, just like how many people who are kind of iconic. Like there was like the Kiss crew, like, and I would say Kiss is more than you. It's like you know
yeah,
Brandon and Ben, and like so, and then there was like the Build a Soil. I met this guy Miles in my valley, makes all the ferments, and then there's Green Life Productions, like Steve. I was really impressed with Steve. I mean, really cool guy. Um,
yeah,
and there's like the kind of OG permaculture, like the like dragonfly earth medicine, like super interesting, fascinating. I never connect, but there's just many different kind of like styles of growing that all came together that weekend, which was sort of interesting to see. This obviously the strong soil food web contingent. Um, And then just like the blue mat guys, I've known Michael for over 10 years, and like so it was fun to see
Yeah.
kind of that crew. There's just like so many different angles and camps, and I really liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. Actually, that was the one thing my big takeaway too was just all the different philosophies and approaches. And it's not that one is right and the others are wrong. They're not exclusive either in any way.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, like I know for me, the big thing for me and for you, I'll speak for you on this too, is science. Like we want to go off of what
Right.
a, agronomic information already exists, and how do we apply that in a scientific way. You talked about A/B testing. That's something we talk about all the time too. Just utilizing scientific method. That was less important to a lot of the people there. A lot of the people there, look at this plant like as a spiritual plant and want to cultivate it in a regenerative manner, but maybe not in a way. And those things are not exclusive from utilizing science, but maybe not in a way of applying science to their cultivation methods.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I mean, totally. I mean, it was kind of interesting. Like, were you there for the Dragonfly Earth Medicine presentation?
No, I missed that one
That was the
too.
key. Okay, so that was the keynote on Friday, and these folks are like devoted warriors. Like they are impressive in their level of purity and really inspiring. I mean, there were so many things that they said that like I didn't agree with or I didn't think were totally accurate, but didn't really matter. Like that wasn't the point. You know what I mean? Like they were sort of presenting a philosophy and a style of growing that I thought was like really cool and really interesting. Um, but yeah, I mean, they don't do any testing. They're not into testing. Like they're much more intuitive growers, and I don't think that's wrong or bad. I think it's really
Yeah,
just yeah. So
I had a good conversation actually with Josh. We had a great conversation. Super nice guy. I struggle, to be totally fair. I struggle a little bit with them. Um, Not with the certification, not with what they share with their property. It looks amazing. But these botanical dried powders that they sell, I don't know if you saw those mason jars on their
no, I didn't
table.
even look at those.
Yeah, those things are like $400 to $600.
Whoa,
They're like crazy expensive, and you can go on Mountain Rose Herbs and look up, what these ingredients and make your own too. But like, I don't see them having a lot of nutritive properties, nettle and some of these different things, and so I don't quite understand the dichotomy there, and I'm not trying to say this as a way of being like antagonistic or anything because they have, like I said, they have a great following and people who support. I just don't. To me, there's like a little bit of a disconnect there in my brain as to how these things are aligned. Because my understanding of permaculture is all about systems design, sustainability, not utilizing a lot of inputs. And then inputs that we use are really, or that you use are really strategically chosen based off of how ecologically they're sourced and how locally they're sourced to what
totally,
you're growing.
totally. Yeah, closed loop, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, I hear you. I heard that there was going to be like a great debate next year, or that was like one of the ideas,
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that.
and
Yeah.
and you know, I have a feeling I'm going to be asked to debate tissue testing versus sap testing, which I don't want to debate. I want to debate soil food web.
Me
So
too.
anyway,
Me
I'm gonna
too.
I'm gonna I'm gonna start preparing now.
Oh wow.
And
Well, maybe we have. So let's explain this. I think this is really fun. So Steve and I were talking about like we were having a conversation on the side, and we were talking about like how this exact concept, all these different philosophies are in the room, and I was like, "Look, Steve, here's the thing. Like, I want people to challenge me on what I'm saying,
totally,
and
that's why I
because
like the debate idea. Totally.
if I can't defend why I do what I do or why I'm saying what I'm saying, then either I need to get further educated, or I need to stop saying it, you know? And I think that's how we learn. As long as you're not utilizing personal insults in the conversation, like it's about a topic, I am 100% in. And so he took that to the next step with his like MMA background, and he's like, fuck it, let's make it a cage match. Let's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
let's create like this whole like bracket system with these debates, and you like work your way up. Like
Yeah, yeah.
he's like,
I
let's
mean,
hype that shit. Yeah,
I'm with you. Like, I don't want to win. Like, my goal is not to win. My one of my styles of learning is like debate. Essentially, I mean, you could ask my wife. Annoys the shit out of her.
yeah,
It's like if there's something like I really want to stress test. If I want to stress test all the assumptions around an idea, I'm gonna argue kind of the opposite side of it. So anyway, that's I think that's kind of where I'm at with it. And I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. So I think debate is
yeah.
a good way for that to come out.
That's a really good point because Steve, just as an example of this, Steve Cantwell, Greenlight Productions, he brought up in his talk um, some interesting things. So like his reason for not he had this whole slide about how HLVD is not a big deal. Hop latent viroid, we shouldn't be
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about it. You just need to grow healthy plants. And he doesn't
Huh.
believe it even cycles that fast. Now, the science behind it wouldn't necessarily support what he was saying, but he's managed to, if he did have it, he thinks he was one of the first people to have it. This dudding thing that we talk about, he thinks that this is he was able to get rid of it just through cycling it quickly. And then when I think like science brain on this, well, maybe he was able to lower the viroid load in the soil and in the plants by cycling them rapidly and keeping them really healthy and not triggering that latent viroid expression. But the reason he doesn't want people talking about it is because he thinks of it from a regulatory perspective. Like they're
Mm,
going to make us all test our plants just like they do in hops and some of these other crops. And the cost of that testing is going to fall on the grower, and it's going to be a regulatory nightmare because we already get hit with so many taxes and other things
totally.
in this industry. And I was like, that's really intelligent. You know, that's a smart perspective that I hadn't considered in terms of why, you know, because I don't want to fearmonger around hop latent viroid, but it is something that I think we need to be really cognizant of. So
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I was that on Saturday. See, that's what I missed his talk
yeah,
Saturday.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. What other
Um,
talks did you enjoy? Oh, I mean, it sounds like you liked his.
Yeah, I liked his talk. I liked your talk. In fact, one of the things from your talk that I think would be worth revisiting for folks, um, and I'm hoping people will post some questions and stuff here in the comments so we can transition over. But sodium and chlorides and flushing.
Ah,
I think we've talked about it, but I think we should retouch it and maybe talk about targets on that and sort of management if you're open to it. You know, maybe 5 minutes on it.
yeah, sure. Totally. Yeah. Um, I mean, okay, so before we talk about targets, there's this interesting yeah, the reason targets are loose, I would say, when it comes to sodium and chlorides is because I think the expression of osmotic stress is going to happen at different levels based on environmental conditions. So, for example, I would expect like, with really high light intensity and high CO2, like you may start to see different effects in different environments versus if you're outdoor and it's just kind of like a more natural style of growing. So it's tough for me. I think what I've realized is it's tough for me to make recommendations on when to leach because A, the environment's different, but B, you really you can get a crop and you can grow a pretty healthy crop oftentimes at
Yeah.
elevated levels. And so it's tough to know like when do you optimize and when do you and by essentially flushing and trying to move levels down and then kind of have to retest and reamend versus when do you think about the costs and the operational costs, specifically labor or downtime. Like if you're not able to flip into your next round as quickly, like that's
Yeah.
like economic loss. And so it's tough to make recommendations on leaching because you don't know all those things. And even if I did, I still wouldn't necessarily know when to recommend it. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, what do you think about
So
that?
just to back up, sodium, not an essential plant mineral or nutrient. Um, So any level of sodium in the soil, all it's really doing for us is raising the salt level, the osmotic pressure in the roots. And if we have a dry back, for example, that's going to be a further concentration of osmotic pressure. So that might be something folks might want to consider if they are dealing with high sodium, high chlorides, is being tighter with their moisture management and dialing that in as a way of reducing salt pressure from drybacks. Chlorides, and this is correct me on this. The plant does need small amounts of chloride, but not typically in the elevated levels that we end up with from compost, water, or typically ocean-based inputs.
That's
How's
right on. I
is that a
think
good
those
summary?
three. Yeah, I think those three are the culprits. Yeah, I think, and you nailed it too with water. So the other variable I forgot to mention is if you're in consistent moisture at like I don't know, 60 millibars or something, and you're running blue mats, you can have way higher levels of non-beneficial, non-essential salts like sodium and chloride than if you're drying back. Because if you think about it, if you reduce the water content 50%, it doubles the EC of that soil solution. So I think that was very well said. That's another variable. In fact, I think you sent me years ago. Ben's operation had like over like 100 ppm of sodium or something, and he was getting phenomenal yields. I don't remember if that was correct, but the point is, I was like shocked. I was like, "Wow, see, you can actually do this with really high sodium levels."
Yeah,
Um,
so full disclosure, I wasn't even really looking at sodium and chloride initially on these tests. I kind of just ignored them, and as long as potassium was higher than sodium, I didn't really look at those metrics. And I've learned a lot since then, a lot of it from you, to improve, my recommendations and analysis and understanding the role of these minerals. Um, so where do you land now? So
yeah.
in fact, actually, after your talk, um, so Brandon and I talked after that. We've kind of drawn the line, and I'll just throw out with chlorides at 200
Hmm.
ppm. But I thought you brought up a really good point about the fact that like there's so much labor that goes into flushing, and we are still seeing people that are successful with it. So I want to change the language on our recommendation to not make it sound quite so definitive. Like,
Yeah, essential.
hey,
Exactly.
you could
Exactly.
flush here, you're high, but you could also do your run, just watch for these things and we'll figure it
Yeah.
out next run.
That's exactly right. I mean, 200 is when I throw a note that says like your chloride is slightly elevated. It has an overdue influence on EC compared to other ions.
Okay.
Essentially, like you want if 20% of your EC is coming from chloride, it's way worse than if 20% is coming from sulfate from an osmotic stress standpoint, which is very interesting. It has
Hmm.
a sort of nonlinear contribution to to osmotic stress.
I
So
did not
yeah,
know that.
somewhere around 200 is fine. But I'm not recommending flushing at 200. I'm moving it up to currently it's 260. I might go up to 280 to 300, and I'm kind of like waiting. I make changes slowly, and then I sort of observe if anyone has any feedback for me before make massive changes. But I am ratcheting it up to probably 280, where I'm like, you should probably leach. And the same reason, like if it's 200 and someone is indoor and doesn't have drains in their room and they have to shop back all their, it's like,
Yeah.
don't worry about it. Let it go a little higher. The other thing is I like to keep an eye on levels over multiple tests. So you might get 200 one test, but if it stays at 200, okay. So it's also kind of a rate change over multiple tests. So yeah, I'm thinking the other thing I'll mention about chloride is I have seen definitively negative results, like bad plant health issues with sodium. I haven't seen as acute of effects with chloride. I have seen what I think is like just sort of, I would say, moderate to low leaf burning. Again, influenced by environment because there's a lot of factors when it comes to
Sure.
like burnt leaves. But I'm not seeing like, like, whoa, there's going to be significant crop loss. Those leaves look horrible. splotchy yellowing, which I would see oftentimes with sodium. So that also makes me more comfortable moving the chloride level up. I think the 200 limit is like, you better start thinking about where they're coming from. And
Mm,
it's so much
yeah.
better to be a little bit more proactive than 100% reactive. So I think 200 is a good limit where it's like they're getting high. Start thinking about it. But at this point, in a living soil, if the soluble salts on a Logan paste test are above, like, let's just say 1,000, I'm almost surely going to see chlorides at that 200 level. It seems like more and more all the soils I'm seeing are like high chloride. Um, Maybe not all of them, but let's just say 50%. So it's a tricky nut to crack for sure.
Yeah, I do want to see more testing on ferments. Um, I have a suspicion that we're getting some from there, but I'd be curious. And what put chlorides on my radar was Mike over at Maincraft Cannabis. He did some tissue testing with over at Jack's, and basically chlorides was his limiting factor of growth, according to Carrie over there.
Oh, whoa,
Uh, and
crazy.
he did see results. I'll have to follow up with him, or maybe we can get him to join a
Wait,
live and
so
talk about
so
it.
so he had a chloride deficiency, you're saying?
No, excess
Oh, okay,
toxicity,
okay, okay.
and that was what was causing the problems in his set, but he leached his soils, and it really corrected things.
Oh,
Um,
cool. That's good anecdotal data. Did he what kind of test was it? A tissue test, or what do they do over there?
yeah, he's an engineer, so he takes really good notes. Maybe I can start an email thread with the 3 of us after this call, and we could do a follow-up and talk about it because he does have some, good data
He's a
on the
great
collection.
guy. He's very smart and he's very open. I really appreciate connecting with him.
Yeah. Well, let's touch on sodium, and then let's jump into some of these questions that we got on here.
Sure, sure.
Um, so where are your targets at for sodium?
So the biggest thing that I've noticed where I start to see visually negative consequences of high sodium is when the percentage of sodium is higher than the percentage of potassium on a paste test. So the percentage of cations in the solution. And but that's not when, let's say, potassium is super low. Like if potassium's, let's say, like 30 parts per million or something,
Yeah.
then that's okay. You just need more potassium and it'll fix that. But if it's, let's say, potassium's high, let's say like 125 parts per million, and sodium is still higher as a percentage, I I am pretty confident that that sodium needs to be leached, like without even seeing the plants. Um, so
Okay.
that's one instance. But usually, what that means is the sodium would be above 50 or 60 parts per million. Um, I'd have to look at my model, which is in an Excel file, and it sort of, I enter test results and it spits things out automatically. I double check all the numbers, but I think the limit right now is somewhere between 50 and 60 parts per million of sodium. Um,
Okay.
but it's like, I would say, start thinking about it above 50. Start identifying sources of sodium, think about where it could be coming from, make changes in your operation, maybe overwater, think about how you would leach. There's a spectrum of how you leach. You can overwater to runoff and just start moving things down through your soil profile and out the bottom of the pot, all the way to you are aggressively leaching and you're just trying to flush everything out, and reset your soil numbers. And so you can start to sort of choose where you are on that spectrum. But once the percentage of sodium goes above potassium, I would be aggressive.
Okay. And then Mr. Leo, I might not be saying it right, asks, what is the best way to recover from sodium or chloride buildup? Now we're separating out sodium chloride, table
Hmm.
salt. We're
Hmm.
talking about that in the constituent elements, sodium and chloride.
Yeah. The short answer is, well, in topsoil, but also in engineered medias, they're pretty mobile. And so you leach the soil. Traditional terminology in cannabis production is you flush. So you usually don't flush a living soil, but when they build up, you want to flush. And people like to use various surfactants. Yucca extract is the most well known surfactant to improve sort of the water penetration through the soil, which I've been told helps a lot from people who have done this. And I recommend, I don't have like a good science or like scientific number or an equation for this, but I recommend taking the EC of your leachate, the water coming out of the bottom, and just keep going until that really is cut in half or so. And you can assume that your sodium and chloride, therefore, would be cut in half more or less. Um, but it's a lot of water. It's I think it's more water than people think. Like you really got to just you can't really overdo it. You can't overflush. I haven't really seen that happen. So then if you are aggressive, you should probably retest because you're flushing everything else out too to a certain extent. Some things everything will go down. Sodium and chloride usually go down faster, which is a good thing. So I recommend retesting and then
Yeah.
making amendments based on what the results show.
Um, yeah, and potassium's going to go away pretty quick too. Nitrates.
Totally, nitrates,
Those
exactly.
are sort of your most mobile, I found. And if you
Hmm.
do have to flush, one pointer would be to get the bed up to like what we call field capacity, like wet the bed, get it fully saturated, and
Totally.
then come back and do the flush. Don't just start dumping water, or you won't get the same results. But that's a great question. There aren't really a lot of other great ways to deal with this. There's supposedly some microbes. There's one called Balox that was recently I saw a
Uh,
paper on Balox. It's not available in the United States. I contacted them. They haven't registered it yet. So hopefully when they do, but they actually showed not that it reduced sodium and chloride, but it reduced the effects of the salinity on the plants, the
huh.
crop themselves. And it wasn't cannabis either. So let's be clear on that. But
Yeah,
um,
interesting. Cool. Cool.
yeah,
Um,
uh, got another question for you, Bryant.
yeah, so
Uh,
the alkalinity,
yeah,
if it's above
yeah.
120, should I consider pHing despite being an organic system? Okay, so this is another loose target where that I chose 120 ppm for alkalinity, and what he's referencing is, you know, high alkalinity generally means that the water will, over time, change your soil solution pH. Your soil is not going to be able to buffer that water very easily because there's a lot in it, and it's pushing the pH up. And so I chose that number because um, as a rough target. So yes, if you're over 120, you should consider pH in your water, but it depends on how high over 120 you are. If you're seeing any negative like effects or plant health in your operation, and then more importantly, is I would get a paste test with Logan Labs and submit your irrigation water and let them
Mhm.
combine your soil with your irrigation water with that high alkalinity and see what that soil solution pH looks like. Look at that, what that paste test pH looks like, because it's possible that the soil is buffering it. Maybe you have an acidic soil and it's kind of like evening each other out a little bit. If I was at 300 ppm, I'd absolutely acidify. If I was at 200, I would probably acidify as well. I would personally.
What about filtration as an alternative to acidification? Just
Absolutely. So
lowering
filtration
alkalinity.
will take care of it for sure. So acidification is generally less expensive, but filtration will take care of all your problems. So let's say you have high alkalinity, your sodium's a little elevated, your magnesium's a little elevated. Filtration will solve everything. And the pH might not change. The pH might even go up after filtration. Doesn't matter. Your alkalinity will go down, and that's all that matters. Yeah, filtration is a good option actually, and so that's why a water test matters. Is it's like, well, what else is in your water? What's making up? What's with that bicarbonate? Is it calcium bicarbonate or is it sodium bicarbonate? Massive difference in terms of how it's going to affect your plants.
Brandon Hudson, he actually is over at KIS. I see he's in here. He asks you, I'd love to learn more about why chlorides are harder to flush than sodium and nitrates. I always see flushes being less effective with chlorides, as
Huh.
chloride is an anion. I expected it to flush better.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's good to hear. I haven't seen that. Like usually when I see a flush, I see chloride as a percentage going down more than, let's say, magnesium or usually I'd have to look at my notes, but what I'm remembering is like chloride would go down 60% and sodium might go down like 50 to 60%. Sulfate might go down 40%. So I've actually seen that those go down, specifically chloride goes down the most, but
Oh,
um,
yeah, we've kind of had the opposite experience. It seems harder to move
interesting.
that target down. Now, to be fair, with some of our testing is we won't test until the next cycle. So we've already had to re-amend and then we don't always know the water. And so
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
by the next cycle, the chloride has risen again.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
some of the chloride or a lot of the chloride could be coming if it's coming from compost or castings, it's gonna keep releasing forever.
mm,
Um, but still, I mean, and this is a very inexact science, this whole flushing testing thing. So we could just be seeing variability in like how it all is happening. We could
right.
also be seeing, for example, like what percent of the chloride is totally soluble, just floating around, sort of, and how much of it is complexed
Mhm.
organically. I think that could be a big determinant in how much you see it go down. It's a good question, Brandon. I'll keep thinking about it. Um,
Yeah, I didn't really think about that, but that's a good point because it's being on the paste test. There may just be more chloride on its way from the compost that we haven't accounted for yet.
yeah, well, and or cocoa for sure. Like even though
Mm,
cocoa shit is usually washed or whatever, it's still complexed in the fibers. I mean, it's like so slowly over time as that cocoa. I mean, all these things mineralize, even peat and cocoa, although slowly. Um, it could keep coming out of cocoa. So yeah, that's a component. Um, yeah, keep thinking about
okay,
that.
I wanna talk to you I wanna change direction here, and talk to you about some of these books that I have
Oh yeah,
in front of
cool,
me.
cool.
Um, maybe this is a more specific example.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
Got mine
before we
over here
do,
too.
there is one I wanna this is supposed to be a Q&A. I wanted you to just can you touch on what about Bob's question? He asked
Yeah,
about,
yeah. Okay, so
molybdenate and cobalt
send
specifically and
me, Bob.
targets
Send
for
me an
those.
email if you have my email because I don't have them off the top of my head. The reason is because I don't have people test the +5, which is the five. I mean, molybdenum is actually an essential nutrient, but the other beneficial nutrients, cobalt, selenium, um, it's like an extra $5 or $10 on the soil test, and I don't have people get that for two reasons. The first is I don't believe that those are the low hanging fruit in terms of like nutrient management, pretty much ever. Molybdenum theoretically could be. I mean, theoretically, if
Mm,
you had low molybdenum, you could see a number of issues with nitrogen fixation, which could lead to different, differing pest and disease resistance. But in terms of, I think that that's not usually the low hanging fruit. It also costs more money, and also I'm nervous. I work in this scale of agriculture where I feel good recommending individual micronutrients, but as you get further down that list, they're harder to source, and you can just create bigger issues because the application rates are even smaller and smaller and smaller. And so I've kind of chosen based on the size of the farms that I work with to not recommend those. But I have rates. Well, for I have sodium molybdate, so hit me up. I'm happy to give you rates or target levels. I don't have soil rates. I have target levels for what I'd be trying to hit, and you'll have to figure them out yourself. The reason I don't have soil applied rates is because I actually recommend molybdenum through a foliar spray. Um,
mm.
so anyway,
My
cool. Well, let's
brother's
talk about
bugging me.
books. Yeah,
Let's
sorry.
do it. I will say, Brandon and I recently had a discussion today actually about manganese because we have not been making any manganese recommendations. Because, like you're like what you said, we really believe in this idea that what's our low hanging fruit. I want to get NPK and all those things dialed, and then look at trace
Totally,
minerals.
100%.
But I've been thinking a lot about this, and actually, from conversations with you and with Mike Wilson, I feel like manganese is the safest of the trace minerals to add. He's not seeing it, even though he's added it at fairly high levels. He's not seeing it build up in the soil, and he's seeing it show up on the tissue slightly higher. Um, so we
Cool.
want to start cautiously adding that to our
I
recommendations.
mean, totally. I think manganese is like from other agronomists that I've spoken to, it's a very powerful nutrient across various crop types for all kinds of reasons. I mean, it's involved in like the splitting of water and photosynthesis, and so you can see when manganese is less than 0.02, when it's below the detection limit on the paste test. I think
Yeah.
you'll absolutely see a hidden. Well, I think you'll see a crop response that's not going to be necessarily visual, but is absolutely real. It's a hidden hunger. Um,
Mhm.
and real quick, Brandon, I got my CCA through the American Association of Agronomy, which it's real conventional. Like it's like most CCAs are working on big commodity row crops, corn, soy, wheat, really. But the content is like it's kind of like what I said about textbooks. So what I said about textbooks is I've read a lot of these like what I call pop agronomy textbooks, which is like kind of a pejorative term. They're not like it's kind of like a whatever. And so I went in the direction of like textbooks because I'm like I want like the most science based information possible. And the good thing about the CCA and the American Association of Agronomy, I have to get CEUs. It's called continuing education units, and a lot of it's just like I don't want to learn about this like pest and soybeans or whatever, but the information is rock solid. So to get it, you have to like learn the basics of agronomy in four different categories, and it's like really good base information. There's nothing sexy about it, but it's really a great foundation. So anyway, it's a pain in the ass to study for it because it's a hard test. You get this thing if anyone's interested, Brandon, if you're interested, you get this book called if this is the study guide, and it's like
Oh,
you,
that's thick. You just turned it sideways.
it's not too bad,
Oh,
but
okay. It looked
to
the
to
other angle
pass the
looked
test,
gnarly.
you kind of have to memorize it. I think.
Wow.
Well, I don't know. I mean, they don't tell you at what grade you have to get or how many you have to get answers you have to get right to pass the test. But I've known people who have failed it. So and they're like pretty smart. So and I think they just didn't memorize the book.
Hmm.
So, but
I
it's
have
good
a lot of
information.
respect for you for having that certification. I
It
think
also forced me.
it
Thank
carries
you.
a lot of
Yeah,
weight.
yeah. I think it does. I also think it forced me to learn conventional nutrient management, which was
Mm,
I don't really use it, but that the understanding gives me a more holistic picture of like just how it all works.
that's awesome. Well, let's so I mean, you kind of already talked about it. Like, you know what? I get crap for being confrontational, and you called these
Yeah,
pop
pop
soil
agronomy.
books,
Yeah, yeah.
pop
Kind of,
agronomy.
kind of teasing. I've got teaming with microbes here, so you're not alone.
Yeah, and Jeff's a good friend of mine, and you know what? We need these books as a way. Like, people are not going to all read those textbooks; they're too dense.
Exactly, exactly.
We need people to distill the information. But I think what you brought up, with these books and this, Team with Fungi not an easy read. Teaming with Nutrients is not an easy read, but it's a heck of a lot easier than the textbooks that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that
for
should be
sure,
acknowledged.
for
These
sure.
authors
And
are
I
doing
think,
us a service.
oh, 100%. And someday, I couldn't write a book now because I don't feel like I have enough to really. If I ever get to the point when I'm 80 years old where I'm like, I really want to share this with the world, I'll write a book and I will be in the pop agronomy section. So just um
Yeah.
because I'm what the reason the textbooks are awesome and the reason I don't read a lot of scientific studies, individual studies, is usually how these textbooks work is there are 1 to 3 professors that study a very specific subject, maybe carbon cycling, and so they're like one of 20 people in the world who know as much as anybody about carbon cycling, and they get together and they write the one chapter on carbon cycling. They read every single study and they take what in science it's called like a body of evidence. So they essentially, because any one study isn't necessarily representing what the truth is, and so it's easy to pinpoint studies and say like, see that the trichoderma reduces siderophores, and therefore it's like no, you need the body of evidence. So you need the studies, all of the studies across 20 years, kind of like the meta analysis. And those professors generally, that's their job. And then they put that into a single chapter. And often that single chapter is brutally difficult to read, but it's like the most legitimate, in my opinion, source of information. So when I'm like,
Yeah.
I really want to know about like a specific question around calcium uptake, like I go to the calcium chapter. Like I don't necessarily read these textbooks um,
Cover to
like
cover.
cover to cover. When I have a question, I look at 6 of them and I go right to the index and I find the areas that I want to learn about.
The only thought I have on that is, I mean, I agree with everything you're saying. And I actually, before this, I said, send me the textbooks to read because I need to do more education on my part. I need to keep learning this stuff. Um, but there's always new research coming out, and cannabis especially makes this really, really
Totally.
challenging because the information does change. I think some of these major concepts like carbon cycling or even soil food web nutrient cycling, microbial loop nutrient cycling, we can find those in the textbook, but some of the latest research is it's just not going to be in there, so
Totally. Well, with cannabis in particular, I mean, yeah, yeah. And luckily, yeah, I wouldn't say, I mean, I've got a book so bad. It's like, what's wrong with my cannabis plant or something? It's like, it was written by just like, yeah. And I have all those books because we don't have the resource on cannabis yet. We don't have the cannabis textbook yet.
yeah, I mean,
Um,
this was the best book back in the day.
that's right. That's right. I wonder where
Robert Clark.
mine is.
And you know what? Credit to him for writing this when he did. I think we got to give props. We've come a long way since then, but we needed this book.
Well, and let me make one more point. That's for me. I was kind of like, well, I guess I was making the point for growers. If you, I guess my point is this: read any book that read all the books or any book. But if you really want a source of truth, like if you want to like to me, I've gone through this personal journey of being like this soil food web thing, like kind of makes sense theoretically. A bunch of things don't add up. So in situations like that where I'm like confused and I want a North Star, that's when I go to the textbook.
um, since we're talking books, I did have a couple books I wanted to mention that I think are really great books for people. I just happen to have them here with me. This one,
Oh
I don't know
yeah,
if you've read
great
it,
book. Oh
The
yeah,
Lean Farm by Ben Hartman. I actually did a
great
podcast with
book.
him, and I mentioned this. Um, I think every grower and gardener should read this book. It's basically it's all about saving you time and money and energy in the way you grow. I don't agree with all of the stuff that he says around cultivation. I think he puts way too much emphasis on compost and organic matter, and he doesn't do enough testing. That being said, I still think his book is amazing. What are
Yeah,
your thoughts?
that book's great. That okay, so that entire methodology I've been obsessed with for a long time. It comes from the Toyota production system. So Toyota in the 80s became by far the most profitable manufacturing giant of automobiles because they created this production system that got then turned into lean manufacturing. And the principles of lean manufacturing are like super awesome and profound for any business making anything. And then he took lean manufacturing and he applied it to farming. So I'm all for it. I think that's like a must-read business book for farmers.
Yeah, market gardeners, so small scale, so you don't have to think of this as
Totally.
like large scale agriculture. But what he does, like little things affect my processes now. So like when I go to start a project in my garden, I pause and I think about like where are all my tools? Are they where they need to be? Because I need to have the right tool at the right time. If I'm taking a trip from my garage down to my garden, I want to make one trip. I don't want to have to go back and forth 5 times. And even just that simple process is more lean than what I would do before, where I'd be like running around scattered, grabbing everything, and take me 20, 30 minutes just to set up a project. Where we store our tools, how we harvest, all those things are really important. So, The Lean Farm by Ben Hartman, he's got multiple books out. He's a great guy. I got to hear him speak. He came up to a conventional ag conference up here in
Yeah, I've heard
Washington,
him
and
too.
then I was like, I got to get you on the podcast. And he did it. I didn't think most of these guys won't translate over to cannabis podcast. They just won't do it. But he's cool. He's
No,
in
he's
Indiana.
cool. He's smart. He's like you can tell he's like an old engineer or something. I'm gonna go
Yeah.
through it. What's your next book? I just want to look. And I
Yeah. So I just have one more.
okay.
This book was my botany textbook. in at Lake Washington College. It's called Botany for Gardeners by Brian Capon. It's a great introductory botany book for people that want to get
Love that.
into it. Um,
Love that.
yeah,
By the
it's
way, I
just
want to
very
throw out one
simple.
more thing that Tad, you should have this. The Oregon Washington Master Gardener Handbook. So like
Really,
the
all
extension,
things Master Gardener, I kind of just like, I don't
yeah, it's
know.
annoying, but I
It's
mean, I'm
good.
not a master gardener, but that's a good handbook to have because you that's all they do. That's all master gardeners do. Is they get questions, they don't know the answer, and they look in the handbook.
I'm
So,
taking notes here. Sorry, that's why my camera's going all wacky.
and I mean, don't get me wrong, like this is a formative book in my life. You know what I mean? It's not a
Oh
textbook,
yeah,
but
I got that one.
it's like and dirt. I mean, highly inspirational. Letters to I mean, yeah, there's just so many good ones here. I didn't mean to slander all these books. But okay, Understanding Roots, super cool, totally inaccurate, totally absurd, but like amazing and fun to flip
Hmm.
through. Um,
Let me walk over to my wife arranged our book by color. I had it all organized.
that's the
So
worst.
great.
That's literally the worst. Okay, another really phenomenal for anyone who's like interested in permaculture at scale, which I am. Like one of the things that annoys me about permaculture is what
Yeah.
sorry permaculture classes is they teach you these methods that apply if you have like a yard that's tiny, but
Yeah.
applying it at scale is never really talked about. And this guy Mark Shepard wrote this book Restoration Agriculture, super inspired a lot of my like perennial crop production, super cool.
Yeah. If we're talking permaculture, this book, I actually got to audit the soil section on it. My good friend Jesse Bloom wrote it. This is more of an introductory book for folks wanting to get into permaculture.
Cool.
Um, and before you get into the deep dive, but I highly recommend it. This is because you hear permaculture and I think, oh gosh, are you like, are you doing human manure? Are you allowed to use a toilet? Are you, can you drive a car and function in society? Because there's it's almost like a religion in some groups, almost like
Yeah,
a
you
cult.
make the pizza oven, you come out. Yeah, totally.
How do we bridge that gap for people who want to live a somewhat semi quote unquote normal lifestyle, but still utilize these principles? And that's kind of where she comes into
Yeah.
play. So
So
yeah.
real quick, this I'd recommend this book for anyone doing tissue testing.
So
Can you
let's
see it?
maybe we could put them in the description at the end of the live,
Yeah, yeah, totally,
the
totally. We don't
names,
have to
because
go
I'm
through all
having
these.
trouble seeing them too.
Okay, cool. Um, yeah, the book thing is just fun. Oh, and did you see Mr. Grow It at the Soil
Oh
Summit?
yeah, let's give him a plug. I didn't know if it was the appropriate moment to bring it up, but he sent me you got a copy too.
I saw him and I didn't have time to talk to him. I felt so bad, and he had sent me a book, and I wanted to congratulate him, but I haven't even read it yet. But I'm excited to because there's not many good modern cannabis books.
Yeah, I think Mr. Grow It is I think he does a really good job of collating information. I'm excited to read it too. I've just glanced through it, but for a beginner grower book, I think it could be a really great option for folks. I was looking at my True Living Organics book over there from way back in the day. Um, there's a lot of books out there, but I think this is a good beginner intermediate guide for people who want to learn how to grow, for sure.
Cool, cool. So my phone's about to die, but do you have any more?
I mean, I have a couple more, but yeah, we can end here soon. Uh, Jean-Martin Fortier, I mean, it's French, I can't pronounce it. The Market Gardener is another
Yep.
good one. He's a really cool guy with what he's doing in market gardening, if that's your thing. And then this is just one of the funnest books I've read that I've really enjoyed about
Hmm.
growing. This person set up in an abandoned alley by their house in Oakland a whole farm. And so it's just really fun. I'd be scared to know what the heavy metals might have been, but
Yeah, right,
it's a
right.
great
Well,
read
yeah.
if you're it's kind of like Omnivore's Dilemma. It's one of those books. It's just kind of like fun to read, but you're not really like gaining cultivation information. It's
Yeah, yeah. Well,
inspiring.
there's the One Straw Revolution,
Oh yeah.
as well as Letters to a Young Farmer, are like where I go if I feel like I need to be inspired. I'm not like trying to learn. I'm just like I'm feeling down. This farming thing is too hard or whatever. Those are good
Yeah.
ones.
Cool. Well, hey man, I love the conversation today. That was a lot of fun. Let's talk about this debate idea if it goes somewhere for next year.
Yeah,
That would be a
totally.
lot of fun.
It would be super
And
fun.
let's get some questions next week. I see there's like 58 people on here right now, and I'm not seeing a lot of questions. So think it over. We'll be here next week, and I'd love to tackle some agronomy stuff with you. I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Thanks for jumping on. It was great to hang out with you at the Soil Summit a little bit. So, um,
Yeah, yeah. So the one thing I was surprised by, some people are we're all different heights. That was the thing I didn't
totally.
realize going
You're like
in.
Brian's short. That guy's. I
You're
thought you
not
were
that
tall.
short. You're not that short. How tall are you?
5'8". Pretty short.
5'8". Okay. Well, there were
I'm
other
six
people there
one.
that, yeah, there were other people that were not as tall as you even. I was just kind of surprised. And then Steve is just like this hulk of a man. He's
No, that's
massive.
that's the one thing that like you don't find in video format. You don't. So it's like,
Yeah.
oh, whoa, pretty funny.
Dan,
Yeah,
I'm actually tall, man. I'm like 6'2", 6'3".
yeah. No, Tad is.
So
There's a
yeah.
picture of us with like grassroots posted it or whatever, and I'm like, Tad is tall.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I never really think about it, but because we're always just talking with our faces. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining, and we'll catch you
Yeah.
next week.
Yeah, great book suggestions, guys. I'll have to check some of these out. Have a great rest of your day.
All right. See ya.